This module is the threat prevention configuring the access protection part of ENS. In this module, the module goals are that we're going to describe the purpose of the access protection policies. We will identify the types of the McAfee-Defined rules that exist. Also, describe situations where the user-defined rules are useful. We will describe the similarities and the differences between the McAfee-Defined and the user-defined rules for access protection. We'll be able to describe how to enable and disable the rules, identify all the supported wildcards and syntax for the exclusions. You will learn how to customize a McAfee-defined rule and how you will create a user-defined rule. Access protection detects any attempt to access files, shares, and registry settings and values, the keys and values. It is enabled by default, and we recommend that you do not disable it. To configure the exclusions is where if I trust a known program or a process, I can exclude it from the access protection rules. And an example is I can actually exclude a supported browser and other Intel applications. The access protection compares a requested action against a list of all the enabled rules and acts according to the configuration of the rule. I can configure it to block, report, or block in report. It just depends on what you want. Now, you do have to have where you select report if you ever want to receive the event on the EPO server. The McAfee-defined rules are available for you to be able to use immediately, and you can also add your own user-defined custom rules to supplement the McAfee-defined rules. So one of the things that I want to be sure that I point out to you is in host intrusion prevention, you had the ability to create custom signatures. This section is where you would now create those types of custom signatures in the access protection rule to do what they did for the IPS rules of host intrusion prevention. The access protection is where we can create different defined rules to prevent any unwanted changes that happens to your computer by making sure that there's access that's restricted to certain ports, file shares, registry keys, and registry values. But ideally, if you really want to do a port blocking rule, you should utilize the firewall feature of ENS. But this feature also protects any of the McAfee processes by preventing users from stopping them. So that's very critical and very important because you want to make sure that someone is not able to stop the on-access scanner or any of the other important features like the on-demand scanner or any of the other McAfee processes that makes this product run. The ENS will examine the action that the user tries to do or a process tries to do. It looks at the action and sees if it has any defined access protection rules. If it has a match, then it will do whatever you want it to do. So if you configured it to block and report, that's exactly what it's going to do. It will block it, and because ideally you should be managing this from EPO, you will get a reported event uploaded to the EPO server. Granted, if you are not using EPO, you will still have that logged in the local log on the machine in the access protection log. We do have some predefined rules, and we have these all divided up into different categories. And if you have any new content updates from our update site, we will have more access protection rules that will be added to this feature. Okay? If you do have where the access protection rule is broken, whatever your action that you had requested by the user or the process will have to do with what your rule configuration said. Now, an example is the action that actually doesn't do anything to happen, it will block it, or it's blocked and you will get a report sent to the EPO server. And then, as I said before, you can look at the access protection log and validate that locally if you want to. In EPO, we have two pre-configured default policies. The McAfee default, which is always a read-only policy, and a copy of the McAfee default, which is always named the My Default, which you can actually edit that policy from the beginning. So I can use the default settings as your starting point, and then after you monitor the results, you can tune your policies to meet your needs. Also, I can create a new policy by clicking the new policy button, or I can go in and click the link for the duplicate the existing policy. But no matter what, you always basically are duplicating a policy when you're creating a new one. The steps that you go through are you select from the menu page, policy, then policy catalog, and then in the policy catalog, you select from the product drop-down list, endpoint security threat prevention. The category that you select at that point is access control. Then I'll open the policy I want to use by clicking on that named policy. You validate that the access protection is enabled. Be sure you click the Show Advanced option so that you can actually see all the rules and the exclusions that exist. The reason for defining exclusions could be that you have a legitimate process that was being blocked having to do with the access protection rule. So I can go in, I can look at the events, and I can define my different exclusions. So I can add these to the policy or have them be a part of my rule. So when you create one, you give it a unique name, and then you have to give it at least one of these parameters. The file name or the path of the executable. You can utilize wildcards. The message digest MD5 hash. The signer cryptographic hash that guarantees that no one has changed the code. But when you do specify the exclusions and inclusions, consider the following. You have to have at least one identifier, the file name or the path, the MD5 hash, or the signer. If I specify more than one identifier, do understand all the identifiers must apply. These are not or conditions, these are and conditions. If you specify more than one identifier and they don't match, then the exclusion or inclusion is invalid. All of the exclusions and inclusions are case sensitive, and wildcards are allowed except for the MD5 hash. To add an exclusion within this policy, be sure that you go into your policy catalog, select from your category the access protection, click on the policy that you want to edit. Within the policy, verify that you did select access protection. Select the Show Advanced button. At the bottom of the exclusions table, you click the Add button. Then you'll put in a name, and we do recommend go with something that's very unique and meaningful so that you can easily remember what this exclusion is for. And then define the different exclusions. And once again, as we mentioned before, give the file path, the file name, the MD5 hash, or the signer. And then we click Save. We have some examples. You can go with just the name of the executable like calc.exe, or you can put the whole path, /Windows /system32 /calc.exe, or /calc.exe, or just ***calc.exe for your wildcards. To talk about the guidelines for exclusions, we have these different supported patterns. You can use environmental variables like the %. An example we have here is the system root, and then you put your WAC, and then you have your different folders. You can also use UNC paths, where you can have the 2 WACs and then the name of your folder or your file. And their full path is where you have an example of I give the drive letter where we have /, then you have the folder name and then a \. But as we always want you to understand, you have to have an absolute path for root level exclusions and threat prevention. You cannot use a leading WAC or a question mark with the colon in a WAC wildcard to match any drive names that are at the root level. We have a KB article, KB 66909, that I would recommend that you refer to look for your consolidated list of all the exclusions that you can use. other guidelines for using the exclusions when you're using the wildcards is you can use a single question mark to mean just one letter. It's been the industry standard forever. Some examples are where we have the W and you have the question mark, and so that means you have to have at least two more letters. So an example is if I did WW, that would not apply to this. Or having WWWW, 4 W's, that would not apply. You can also use the single asterisk, and the single asterisk will always match multiple characters except the backslash. So you cannot have it where it's looking at a path. So an example we have here is you see C:\\, ABC \, and then we have the asterisk, which means any named folder in that path with that same path. And then you have the other folder afterwards where you have the XYZ. Now the double asterisk is the wildcard if you do have the fact that I may have several folders deep and I don't know exactly how I can do this. But that's where you can do the double asterisk and you can utilize that. The system variables with that are not recommended. Now if you're using Linux, you need to specify the path as /users, /user, /desktop, / and then the asterisk. But once again, we have 2 KB articles for you to refer to for all the guidelines for syntax. The first one is that KB 66909 and KB 50998. In this slide, we have an example of several wildcards. So you can see the first one where we have the double asterisk is saying I'm excluding a specific file in a folder named temp, but that folder could exist anywhere on the system. The asterisk where it has test.docs, that is the same thing except for the fact that we're saying this specific file, and that can be anywhere on the system. You'll see the others where I can use the asterisk for a specific file in any folder on any specific drive. If I want to the users with the double asterisk, we can exclude any folder that exists under users and any folder under the user data. Same thing with the documents and settings. I'm basically saying I'm excluding the favorites folder for all the users. We have the double asterisk where I'm excluding any temp on any folder on any drive. And the same thing, but with the temp, that we have a temp file. And then we have the second to the last where here's the drive. We're excluding all files that have a TMP extension on any folder on any different drive or a specific drive. And then we have the last example is I'm actually excluding any file with the HTML extension anywhere on your system. A guideline for your exclusions for the MD5 hash, you need to understand it has an algorithm or a function that we use to cipher data in any way that cannot be reversed. It is used to verify the data integrity, the password, and the authentication. This is why we find that this is very useful in our rules. The size will vary depending on the hash function that is used. If you change a single bit in the data, it will create a completely different hash. The little example that we have here just shows, well, first time it's Fox, and so I have my hash, and then I add the red fox runs across the ice, so the hash changes again, and then we change it where it says the red fox walks across the ice, and then the hash will change again. So the nice thing you can do is you can use a little tool like this quick hash that you can get from quickhash.com that you can actually see what the hashes are. The guidelines for using a signer for your exclusions is you're requiring a digital signature. So your option is I can allow any signature, which basically means whatever signature is there, we let it go. You can use that. But if you actually select the signed by, then only the files that can be excluded have to be signed by that specific process signer. The distinguished name of the signer for the executable is required, and it must match exactly how the entries are in that field. It also includes the commas in the different spaces. So if you actually wanted to find the signer of an executable, I can right click on that executable and select the properties. You select the Digital Signatures tab, select the signer, and then click Details. On the General tab, I can click View Certificate, and on the Details tab, I can select the subject field, and I can see everything that has to do with the distinguished name of that signer. So this shows you an example of an Explorer where you have CN equals Microsoft Corporation, OU is MOPR, the O is the Microsoft Corporation, L is Redmond, S is Washington, and C is US. An overview of the rules. The McAfee predefined rules prevent modification of commonly used files and settings. You can change the block and report. You can add and exclude an executable, but you cannot delete this rule or modify the rules or change the settings of what's protected by these rules. The user-defined rules that you can create supplement these rules. You can totally edit those. You can delete them. You also have subrules within these rules that are supported. You have to have at least one subrule for each access protection rule that you create having to do with Windows systems. So if you want to see a list of all the access protection rules to implement, you can look at the document PD 25203 Combating Ransomware. Basically, the user-defined access protection rules are where you can create them to prevent modification of files or folders on your systems. In this screen, you'll see the example of the McAfee-Defined rules. By default, we only have two rules that are enabled. One is only reporting, but the other one where it says remotely creating auto-run files, that's the only one that it's set to block. So you can go in and you can scroll to the bottom and you can select the edit button where you can go and create your own rules. All the previous access protection rules that were applied to the self-protection has been moved to the common self-protection settings. All the other previous port blocking rules have been removed, and the intent of that is that you configure your firewall rules to block the ports required by your organization. The access protection rules are intended to supplement the protection provided by the other ENS protection features. A good example of this is in VirusScan we had a port protection rule that prevented anything from sending out email by using SMTP unless it was a valid email client. That rule no longer exists in the McAfee-Defined rules. In this slide, you'll see an example of us editing a McAfee-Defined rule. You'll see that I can go in here, I can select the edit, I can change the actions where it's either block, report, or block in report. Then I can add an executable by clicking the add button. I can also delete a pre-existing executable that you had. And then I can, after I add the executable, I can click toggle exclusion status to change the state between include or exclude. If I want to remove the executable, I can click delete. When you're done, be sure to click the save button. An overview of the user-defined rule. Remember, this is just to supplement your McAfee-Defined rules. So first, before you actually go in to create one of these rules, first verify that we don't already have a rule that will meet the conditions of what you want. But the similar options for your rule is you do have to give it a name, what actions you want, the exclusions, the executables, and if need be, a username that has to do with it. But you do have to have at least one subrule. The subrule, you'll give it a name, and you can give the information about the subrule. Is it files, registry key or value, processes, and services? You have to have at least one operation for the subrule, so what like operations that are to block, and then also one subrule parameter like include, exclude, and the file, the folder, the name, and the file path that you want to include or exclude. The workflow of adding a user-defined rule follows where we open up the policy, we click Show Advanced, scroll down to the Rules selection, then you select your rule and you select Edit. On the actions, you'll select Block, Report, or Block and Report. Then I can select the other actions on the main policy page. To add an executable, you click your Add. You'll have an empty table. And the empty table will mean I'm excluding all executables, so be sure you do define an executable. After I define the executable, click the Save. After adding the executable, click that toggle inclusion status between include or exclude. Then scroll down to the Subrules section and click Add. And then you can configure the properties of the subrule. Be sure that you decide whether or not you actually want to select the read operation, because the read operation might really impact your performance because you might be reading way too many files. Then define at least one parameter. So you scroll down to the parameters and click Add and select your inclusion of include or exclude. Put in the file, the folder, the name, the file path. Do remember you can use your wildcards, and then save the subrule and then save the rule. So there's 2 saves in this process. On the user name page, this is where I can say who is the user that this rule actually applies to. Your valid entries could be machine name, whack, local username, or just dot / local username, or dot / administrator for the local administrator. You can also use your domain user where you have domain name, whack, domain username, or local system where you could type local whack system, and so that would be where it specifies like the NT authority system account for all the system accounts on all the different machines. Once again, you have your inclusion status, include, exclude, or the toggle inclusion status as to whether or not you want to change the inclusion between include and exclude. In the subrule configuration, this figure shows where I can give the description and the different properties of our subrule. You do have to give it a unique name, and then you select the subrule type. When you select the subrule type, the options for the targets will change. So an example is if I select files, it's going to give me the option to fill in the information for the file or directory. Registry key is going to be different, where I can say what type of registry key. You have registry value, you have processes, you have services. When I select the different types, what has to do with the actual parameters of what can be protected will show up in the screen, and so I can change those. So what we have is like for registry key, I can select write, where it basically will block any access to writing to that specific key, or I could say select create, where no one can create that key, or delete, or read, or enumerate, load, replace, restore, change permissions. So you have to really look at what is it your goal is that you want to do to actually prevent someone, or you just want to log that event, and I shouldn't really say someone, maybe some malicious activity on anything. What do I want to prevent, and what do I want to just log on that event? This figure shows how you configure the targets and the Subrule Target sections of a subrule. Here I can select the inclusion status, and I must complete file, folder name, or path name field. Do remember you can utilize the wildcards. So in the targets I can add, delete, toggle, or include or exclude a directive. In the actions, you can click your edit or duplicate if I need to. In evaluating the targets in the subrules, each one of these targets is added with an include or an exclude directive. When you're evaluating your system event against a subrule, the subrule will evaluate it to true if at least one of the subrules has an include to evaluate to true, and all the excludes evaluates to false. Always remember, exclude will take precedence over any include. In further understanding how the exclude works, if a single subrule includes and excludes a file, for example, c:/marketing/jjohns, the subrule will not trigger. But if the subrule includes all files but excludes the file c:/marketing/jjohns, the subrule will trigger if the file is not jjohns. If a subrule includes a file c:/marketing/*, but it excludes the c:/marketing/jjohns, then the subrule will trigger for anyone under the marketing, but will not trigger for the jjohns that is under the folder marketing. Sometimes access protection events are not available in EPO, even though you have the events logged locally and you can look at them in the local log. And I can confirm that they actually are occurring on the client system. This is because we have a default configuration in the ENS policy that has to do for event generation, and it's suppressing or excluding access protection events so that they never reach the EPO server. In this case, the endpoint security common policy is configured not to send events that are informational. Also, you have the McAfee agent event filtering policy configured on the EPO server settings that is excluding different event IDs. For example, these two, where 1092 and 1095 are being excluded. So one solution is for you to modify the ENS common policy to send all the events. So you go into your EPO console, select the policy catalog, endpoint security common, select your specific assigned policy, or the my default, select show advanced, and in the event logging section you can change the drop down for the access protection events to log all events. Just realize these events that are informational might be filling up your database, and it's not really a necessary event for you to be seeing in your queries on EPO. So you need to make that determination as to, do I really want informational type events or not? But if you're not seeing them, be sure to refer to these settings to make your changes. Check your understanding, multiple choice. When creating exclusions in ENS, which wildcard matches a single character? Is it A, B, or C? If you answered C, then you are correct. And to check your understanding, true or false, McAfee-Defined rules require at least one subrule. Is this true or is this false? Well, if you answered false, you are correct. If you recall, McAfee-Defined rules are already defined with all the necessary settings. All you do with the McAfee-Defined rules is you'll set your exclusions. The key points that we want to review for this module is to remember, access protection prevents any unwanted changes to your computer by restricting the access to specific files, specific shares, registry keys, and registry values. It is enabled by default. Do not disable it, because you might be giving someone the ability to actually disable ENS if you do that. Exclusions prevent trusted executables from being blocked. You can have them be policy-based or rule-based. For finer control of your exclusions, utilize all the wildcards that we have. You have the question mark, 1 asterisk, or 2 asterisks, and you can also use system variables. For finer control of your exclusions, please utilize the MD5 hashes or your signatures. Remember, threat prevention requires an absolute path for those root level exclusions, so I cannot use a leading backslash or a question mark colon backslash wildcard to just match a drive name at the root level. Your McAfee-Defined rules protect against common attacks such as someone trying to alter a file, executables, or registry, or creating executables or installing any objects. Your user-defined rules are to be defined to supplement the McAfee-Defined rules. The user-defined rules have similar options as the McAfee-Defined rules, but remember, you do have to create at least one subrule.